Okay, let's now talk about an introduction and what goes into an introduction. Firstly, you'll have resources with this information on it in other sources such as your OneNote. A good introduction in history is going to have a statement of your hypothesis, a good thesis statement. Now, I often find that it's my opening line to punch it out straight away, that hypothesis, or what often is referred to as a thesis statement. Bam, first thing out. A lot of people also say the final line, the final sentence of your introduction is best for the thesis statement, is best for the hypothesis. But hey, it has to be there. It's in a prominent spot. It's either first or last before we start getting into the body of your work. It really doesn't matter which of those, but let's not have it lost in the middle somewhere. So, statement of your hypothesis. Secondly, a really good introduction defines key terms. Now, I'm not talking about dictionary definitions where you've gone dictionary.com states that and does an incredibly boring way. You're integrating it in. You're explaining your ideas. You're using synonyms for key terms so we know what's going on. Okay, you're working it in, integrated, not some clunky list of dictionary definitions. The next thing is, we need to know where you're intending to take us in your essay. You foreshadow your arguments, you telegraph your arguments. We can see what's coming up. So, in your opening paragraph, you're dropping hints. There's no surprises. If it was a mystery novel, we would hide our ending to the very last chapter. But in history writing, as opposed to mystery writing, in history writing, we prosecute our case from the start. We know what you're arguing and we know what evidence you're going to use to get us there. So you're building arguments right from the start, you're foreshadowing it, you're hinting at it. There's no surprises as we work through your essay after your introduction. To tie it all together, we need some appropriate linking and background information. So we're keeping everything cohesive in your introduction by using background. It almost might feel like definitions at times. You're explaining ideas between those official definitions, between your hypothesis and the definitions and the arguments. It all flows, it's fluent, it's all connected. And often the background information, it sets the scene. Remember that in primary school, sets the scene of your essay. That background information holds it together like glue. Your introduction is essentially saying, this is where I'm going. A conclusion, when it's well written, will often feel like it's repeating your introduction in some ways, because it'll say, this is where I've been. So an introduction is saying, this is where I'm going, and a conclusion is, this is where I've been. What's in my rearview mirror. So don't overly fret if you feel your conclusion sounds a bit repetitive. In history writing, that's something that happens. So let's have a brief look now at this question and this mock-up introduction in reply to it. Take a moment now, look at it, and think, what are the elements of a good piece of history writing that you can see there? And then, can you identify each of the parts of a strong introduction? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit pause here for a moment, and what I want you to do is take a moment, do the same, see what you can see. What are the elements of a good piece of history writing you're noticing here? And what are the key elements you can see in it that make up a strong introduction? It's not perfect, but what do you see in it? Well, I've had a little bit of a pause there, and I hope you have too. Hopefully you're looking at that introduction and going, all right, I can see it's in third person. I can see it's in past tense. I can see it makes really good use of key terms. I can see that it picks up on the actual question that has been asked. It's answering the question that's been posed. It's responding to the task of the assessment item. Hopefully you're seeing those elements. Hopefully you're seeing it's well written grammatically. There's no spelling errors in it. Punctuation's correct. Grammatically it's effective. And then hopefully you'll see the key elements of an introduction, and let's expose those for you now. In this case, the hypothesis is the opening sentence. Compare the hypothesis to the task. Many of the keywords of the task are included in the hypothesis. The hypothesis clearly states the time and place of our historical conversation that we're about to have. We're making a stand on a historical issue here, and we need to make sure we're very specifically connecting to the right time and the right place. So we've got Germany, 1919 to 1933. That's what we're talking about. It answers the question. The question says, analyse how the Nazis were able to exploit political, social, economic conditions. The hypothesis says it was able to transform Germany from the Weimar Republic to a totalitarian state by using a range of strategies and tactics that exploited, that were well suited to exploiting the social, political, and economic conditions. Now, it's not a fact. We're arguing it's well suited and that there's a range of strategies. This isn't a fact, but it's not weak. It's an idea that can be prosecuted. And a lot of people go, oh, doesn't a hypothesis supposed to have a because statement or some sort of justification? Well, that doesn't have a because statement, but it certainly has an idea that needs to be justified later on. We justify our hypothesis, if you like, through arguments. Now, if I just made that statement there and didn't want to back it up or didn't have a way of backing it up, and I didn't telegraph that in the introduction, it probably wouldn't be a very good hypothesis. But I've got some of those other elements, and let's see if we can spot them. Before we can really talk about the Nazis, we need to know who we're talking about. Let's not make the assumption that everyone agrees and everybody knows. So there's a couple of locations where keywords are defined, but very quickly the Nazi Party are defined as a particular political group at a particular time with particular beliefs. Notice in there the word faction is used. And that's partly to get away the idea of, what's a synonym for saying party, a political party? It's a political faction. So we're looking for the right word in the right way to get the right meaning. Choose your words really carefully in history writing. Now, there's a few bits in here where I could argue background information is used, and sometimes you might even argue that parts of the definitions are background information. But here we are, you can see, look, this idea of it being a fledgling liberal democratic Weimar Republic isn't really defining Weimar, but it is giving us some further background as to what kind of government it was. I'm saying that the Nazis were led by Hitler. It's not defining the Nazis, but we're using some additional background information to help make our ideas clear. But I do then want to define a term that might come up later, November criminals. And it's interesting, I've popped November criminals at the end of this definitional type statement and said, so I can look at this and go, November criminals, who were they? Well, they were democratic Weimar politicians who were being blamed for Germany's challenges after the war. So far, I've got a whole stack of key elements of a good introduction here, but no mention of arguments. So let's see how the arguments are all tied together, and it's important that it all sits cohesively together. In this bit of shading, you can see that when I'm arguing how the Nazis were able to exploit, I'm going to say they did it through propaganda, legal politics, careful cooperation with other political parties and powerful men, and I'm going to use violent acts as one of my arguments. So in a way, I've got 4 arguments. Now, I might end up combining these, but my reader now knows that those are the ideas that should follow through later in the essay. And they pick up on in my hypothesis the words strategies and tactics, so propaganda, legal, political tactics, careful cooperation and violent acts, they're strategies and tactics. Oh, I see. So the end of my paragraph is still tying in cohesively with my hypothesis. And also, I'm making sure that I've picked up again on this key point that they exploited the Weimar Republic's difficult conditions. Those strategies and tactics exploited it. And if I look back to the end, I'm talking about November criminals. Oh, they're the people to blame for the challenge. Okay. And I'm also talking about how they undermine the Republic, and that makes sense too. And the task asked me about how the Nazis were able to create their own alternative to the democratic government, and I've used the word alternative towards the end and said that alternative was totalitarian. And if I think about that, that's in my hypothesis again. So everything ties together. In the next task, or in the next video, what I want to do is talk a little bit about writing that hypothesis statement. What do hypotheses look like, and how do you go about doing it? So this is an introduction, and the introduction is all built around a hypothesis. The next video, this is my commercial if you like, my next video is talking about that hypothesis or thesis statement.